All right, everyone, welcome back to another week of the Weekly SITREP. I'm Mark, and my co host is Kyle, and we are both former Army officers getting together to talk about what is going on in the world of business and politics. That way, if you are someone who's considering about getting out of the military, you can feel more comfortable about heading out into the wild of the world, and you can use this information to, go to a school interview or a job interview, or if nothing else, just feel more comfortable about like when someone talks about, certain business terms or something, you know what's going on, and you can feel more confident with your decision of heading out after the military to figure out what else you want to do in life. So we've got some really cool stuff we're going to talk about today. So we're going to get right into it. So we start every episode off with excuse me here, just getting my notes in order, everyone. Sorry. We start every episode off with what we call the mission brief. And so what this is military related news, just as a way to kind of like ease us into the conversation, talk about some of the things that we know vets care about. So this is something to do, with national defense and security and everything. And then we'll head into the Sippy Sit Rep later, was where we talk about all the business and politics news in the civilian world. So the first thing we're going to talk about is NATO. Okay. So the article we're looking at right now is on Defense News, and it's talking about the NATO alliance and how they incorporate um, new forms of technology into the alliance and the importance of creating interoperability with those new technologies across the alliance. All right. So Kyle, as someone who kind of like works in the defense industry a little bit and is a pretty tech savvy guy as well, what's your kind of take on this?
Yeah, this is really funny. And it's funny, right? Because it's like taking a problem that like the US has and then like multiplying it across like multiple countries,
Right.
right? And so yeah, I work in, the defense innovation realm, I guess that is now a thing. Uh, and they watching the government try to do this, right, with its, civilian partners is really interesting because they're trying to figure out something they've never done before, or they haven't done in a really long time. And there's a lot of confusion and everything as you would expect in a venture like this, right? And when you think about Europe's problem, like the whole idea behind innovation in like the defense community right now is you're trying to find the startups, and startups can be local to an area, or by definition you're kind of looking for like diamonds in the rough here, right? To kind of polish and like that can help you be better, or invest in. And it's like, okay, so the United States trying to do it, we're like the center of innovation. And so you take that problem, with all our different agencies or whatever, um, that are running like these centers of innovation, and then okay, now replicate that problem in Europe, but you now have like a bunch of sovereign countries, right?
Right.
While unified under NATO, um, it just seems it's very overwhelming, right? Because it's just like it's like taking a bureaucracy and multiplying it by 10 or whatever, whatever, and then however many countries are in NATO, and then thinking about like each one of those countries has its kind of own like innovation base, right? So you're not even like like own policies that they'd have to set up to figure out how they want to do innovation.
Right.
It just seems like a very daunting task to
Yeah.
me. And basically the NATO leader is saying, hey, we have to do all this innovation work and then make sure everything like works together, which like is the reason governments do these huge scale programs, right? To like reduce the risk that stuff isn't going to work with each other.
Yeah. And I kind of like the basic idea of like what we're talking about here is, if I'm a guy if I'm a US soldier on the ground and I'm calling in, coordinates for an airstrike with a NATO ally, then the French Mirage jet that's flying overhead is able to like receive my transmission, understand where that's happening, and then, make whatever technical things have got to happen across the system to put that put that weapon like on the target that I want it to hit. And then the Turkish radar system or whatever can also track it because we're all NATO allies. Like that's kind of like the general idea of what's going on here. And Kyle's right. Like there's so many complications about this when like each country has different ways that they're running innovation. And they also are trying to like, not necessarily show all their cards at the same time to everyone. Because everyone wants to keep, some level of secrecy, even within the NATO alliance as well.
Yeah, it's funny to think that like military innovation, right, has typically been shrouded in like some kind of immense level of secrecy. And I guess from my viewpoint, they're still trying to do that. It's just like kind of impossible because by definition, you're working with a lot of small commercial companies. So You're not like working with fucking Lockheed Martin skunk workers, right?
Right. You're working with like the small defense startup that's working on
Yeah.
some radar widget, some line of code that's gonna like make it better or whatever. Um, but how do you like use that line of code? I mean, I'm like oversimplifying here probably a little bit. It goes across the entire NATO system, and like how does everyone kind of use and rely on like that same little bit of thing? It's difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult. And it's it's like in the free market, right? The free market has like an incentive to kind of collaborate and make things work together or not work together, right? And let consumers choose. But you just don't there just isn't that same sort of like, no like competition, right? Among the government, right? Because it's a monopoly. So
All
crazy.
right. So the next thing we're going to talk about here is AI in commanders' decision making. Okay. Now, at first glance, I think it's easy to hear something like this and think of, like an automated drone overhead that's making like kill decisions automatically. But it doesn't necessarily have to be something like that. It could be something as simple as like, doing the calculations on how many rounds your various platoons are going to need or whatever, and it just automates that and just like makes the decision for you. And then like you as the commander look at that, verify, okay, that makes sense, and then you make the order versus having to crunch the numbers or whatever on it. And it's like, how do we incorporate automated, artificial intelligence and like automated decision making into the commander's decision making process? Do you have any thoughts on this, Kyle?
Actually, I was talking to one of my friends from West Point who's still in the Army a couple months ago, and he is in this AI cloud technician course that the Army is running out of Carnegie Mellon.
Oh, crazy.
Whoop, whoop. But he was telling me, he's like, yeah, they want to like implement all these like machine learning tools, and of course to do that it needs a lot of computing power, and so it has to
Right.
run on the cloud. And so we're going to be like, I think like the brigade level or something. You're going to have like your brigade like cloud technician or something officer,
Oh,
that's
damn.
going to be like, hey, like how, because you have like some sort of like property book officer at brigade, right? Brigade PBO, have like your brigade cloud automation officer who's going to ensure that all these tools that they want to employ, like, and you think of these tools, right, think of them more like they're like kind of like office productivity tools, right? Like help you, like Mark said, calculate, like estimate like all this stuff and use data and come up with what you think like a realistic like load is, right, that you're going to put out for a unit, given the mission inputs, right? Like it's going to be stuff like that, which is one step towards having that in Halo where you have Cortana. She just like touches like just go that way, right?
Yeah. Roger that.
This is the first step. This is the
Right.
first step, right?
Yeah.
And maybe one day we'll have like some floating hologram that just like tells us what to do militarily. Like
Yeah. But I mean, like you can imagine, I mean, if I want to go like, way future tech here, you can imagine a place where, um, let's say we have like a major operational theater where there's like tons of machine learning going on, and the machine is able to like analyze every type of platoon engagement, battlefield, encounter, whatever it may be, and say, okay, like here's like the various variables. I see a strong probability or strong, correlation between these set of factors and this level of success. And so like I'm going to give you like this level of likelihood that, putting a platoon in this place at this time or whatever will get you the results that you're trying to achieve. And it's
yeah,
just crazy to think that like that could happen.
yeah, and imagine it gets so good too, right? Like that it like commanders start to basically say like, look, if you receive like an output from this machine, like you can consider this like a legal order.
Right.
Like I'm like, you don't even have to come to me, you just like do it, right? And that'll happen too. If like they develop like a certain level of confidence in it, they'll be like, yeah, consider like if you get an output from the, I don't know, the AI alms M or something, it's going to be
Yeah.
like, consider that a legal order that you must follow.
Also,
It's
something I
going to
was
be
just thinking about
crazy.
here. So I know, I'm not totally spun up on this, but I know that Amazon, we've talked about Amazon Web Services a number of times on this show. And I know on some level, Amazon does some type of like cloud computing on the classified side for the US government. And so I'm like wondering
Yeah,
if
they
there's an
do.
opportunity for someone out there, like, you get out and then now you become like the brigade level cloud services guy or something. That seems like a pretty cool job and a cool way to stay in the fight too, if that's what you're interested in.
Yeah, yeah. They'll need their think of it like how when you went to Afghanistan or Iraq, right? You had like these vast like contingent of contractors who are, supporting the war effort, right? You'll have that too with this stuff, because the army just doesn't possess the military just doesn't possess the skill set.
Right.
They're going to have like tons of government contracts out there to support it. There's
Yeah.
no way that they won't.
All right. So we're going to move on to the next story here because we got lots of cool stuff we want to cover today. And this next one, so, the Biden administration, I think now, so we're recording this on February 20th. So now they've been in office for a month. Okay. And we're talking about the Deputy National Security Advisor. All right. So his name is Dilip Singh, and he's a former official at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which is like kind of considered the most powerful of the 12 branches of the Federal Reserve. Worked in the Treasury Department, and he's also worked at a number of high level private investment firms. Okay. And so this is a interesting signal that the administration is putting in. Okay. And my kind of takeaway from this, and the article kind of gets into it a little bit, is that the new administration is taking like a holistic approach to national defense, right? And I think the two words that come to mind are industrial base. Like, how do we make sure that we have the critical capabilities within our industry to ensure a national defense? Like a prime example, I think we can all recognize with is masks and respirators, right? COVID hit, PPE was a huge big deal, respirators were a huge big deal, but we didn't have the industrial capacity to meet the needs that we needed, right? So we had to go to other countries. We had to rely on China to get us the things that we needed. And so I think they're looking at this and realizing, like, where are we weak in our industrial base, and how can we position ourselves in order to secure our national defense in a holistic manner, and not just building planes and bombs and new missiles and everything.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because people, there's kind of talk like in the 90s and everything where people are like, conflict as we know it is essentially like over. And to some extent it's kind of true, right? Like nation state conflict is generally not that active, but it's been substituted by this economic conflict, right? Where there's this really kind of like flexing of like soft to medium power. And this is a further example of the US deciding that, if we're not going to be as robust militarily, or even if we are, you still have to compete on this front just as quickly.
Right.
It's almost kind of like the space race, right? Like back in the 60s, before this, I mean, I guess all the way through the 80s too, right? Like there was a space race then. It's like, hey, we're not just competing, like we're sending all this stuff up into, shooting all these rockets up, and they're all, civilian rockets. But like, I mean, it's all part of like developing like new technologies that eventually have some like military capacity or power projection.
Right. And it's hard to also look at this and not talk about China, because their industrial base and their national strategy are inextricably linked with one another, right? So we look at something like 5G, and there's huge worries of Huawei and 5G, and Chinese backdoors and all that jazz and everything. And we're realizing that if we want to continue to be like the predominant world power, then we have to like be able to create these new technologies and like build these new industries ourselves, and we can't rely on countries that maybe don't have our best interests in mind as we develop and enter into these new spaces.
Yeah, what's funny about this is I actually had a chance to like learn about China's AI, like, or not AI, how they do some innovation work, right? And it's like, hey, they go in and they like invest like 15% or something with like private companies, like a venture capital companies like jumping on like a big deal, or
Right.
a venture, yeah, they'll be like, hey, we want, but we want some dual use commercialization. And they make it attractive to the investors by being the ones to take the first loss, right? So say you're doing like a seed round, or like a series A, right? Like the Chinese government is saying, we're happy to take the hit, here, the first hit. And then like it entices more people to, or more organizations to invest money, right? Because it's being subsidized at some level, which probably has some distortion effect on it. But
And just a quick note, since you mentioned Series A, just like a little aside here on how, in particular, like venture and like angel investing kind of works. So if you're like a new startup, the first time you go to a new investor and like raise money, it's kind of considered the seed round, okay? And then the preceding rounds after that, you start getting a little more mature in your development as a company. And like as you're raising more capital to continue to build out the product that you're envisioning, you might have a Series A round, a Series B round, a Series C round. And it can go all the way. I mean, they can kind of keep going. I think typically it's like in the C or D round when people then decide to IPO, depending on the maturity of the company or something. But just a quick primer on kind of like how those rounds work in the world of funding new investments.
Yeah, and like by the time a company would like IPO, right, or really become well known, you're gonna hear, oh, it's got like multiple rounds of investing.
Right.
Like this is basically implies there's been a lot of due diligence done on the company, right? And so it
Yeah.
ups the people feel, hey, this is more of a sure thing.
Yeah.
Than a wild ass, likely to fail thing.
Right. All right. Well, Kyle, I'm going to punt this last one over to you because it's kind of sounded like it was just right up your alley, and it sounds like you get some inside baseball to share with us a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, inside baseball, I guess, right? I mean, this is a publicly available article.
Right.
I'm not spilling anything that's not out in the public domain. Yeah, now, so I have a bunch of people, because they'll be like, oh, you're doing in defense innovation. Could you talk about, like some of the companies that they're out there, right? Because people are like, oh, I want to get involved in it, but like, what's the universe of companies, right? And I think this is a really good example of how defense innovation is kind of happening on the ground. And what this article is talking about is the Army is trying to figure out ways to resupply artillery units faster, in particular self-propelled howitzer units faster, right?
Right.
And there's like kind of like a rate limiting, right? They want them to be able to shoot faster and farther because they think, hey, like the next kind of, if there's a great power conflict, right, we wouldn't have the same sort of like air capabilities. They'd be more degraded, right? You wouldn't have air superiority like you would in Afghanistan or something. And so they're trying to solve this problem of having units be able to shoot really fast and be resupplied and move quicker, right, and take advantage of all the new technology out there, which is why it's the Army's Field Artillery Autonomous Resupply Program. And so when you think about this, right, you've got companies out here, like one of them is named Actuate. And what Actuate has developed is this, tool that you can put on like an Android phone that could like go with like a battery or something, or you have like several of them. And as they're getting like transfer artillery rounds into the, if they've been like palletized and put down, or they're coming from like a CAT into a, M109A7, they can take this computer they can take this phone, right, open up the program and like scan like a pallet, right? And the pallet of ammunition would have like a code on it, and they'd use like optical character reading technology, and it goes and it says, boom, okay, we know what's in here. We know how many, with the DODEC numbers and all the other things, because there's all these like variations, right, that people have to record on hand now,
right?
Because there's like slight differences between the rounds and everything. And so then that information then gets transmitted into like the Army's like ammo management system. And then it gives like the battery level, a view of like what it's doing with ammo and everything. So it just kind of speeds up the process. And they demonstrated this to a brigadier general who's the director of the long range precision fires cross-functional team out of Army Futures Command. And he was like very thrilled with it. I know that for sure. Right.
Yeah.
So if you want to like insider baseball, I know he was quite thrilled with it.
Sure.
And he couldn't believe it. He's like, holy shit, these guys like developed this, right? It's really cool. Like this is an example of stuff happening on the ground. And then you got these other companies here, Aptronic, who I visited with, and CR Tactical. And they're, developing some really cool technology as well. And there's actually some vets working in there as well. And so Aptronic has this kind of like robotic arm that they can use to like pick stuff up. And the idea is to attach it on the back of a howitzer or a CAT, right? So instead of having like pick up an artillery piece by itself, you could like have this gantry that kind of moves it. But it's a really cool device, and I'm not going to kind of spill how it works because that's their secret sauce.
Yeah.
And then CR Tactical is doing an ammunition management system, right? So this is cool, right? So like when you think of like defense innovation on the ground, this is the sort of stuff that's happening, and this is being facilitated through Army Futures Command.
Yeah. And I'm sure. So I mean, like my second deployment was to Syria, and I know the Marine artillery guys out there were straight up just like making it rain steel. And I'm sure like they ran into some serious logistic challenges and like keeping these guys supplied and understanding, what's the breakdown of data and breakdown of like ammo and different types of allocation of, different types of rounds and everything. And like when you're like shooting that much, like you got to have something
Yeah.
you want to move faster, and you need some level of automation if you want to be able to match the effects that you're trying to achieve on the battlefield.
Yeah, and like I mean, for example, right, like when they like take rounds and they put them in like an A7, right? They got to like write down like all this information and then pass it back, and it like goes up to like their battery and everything, and it gets like integrated, right? So it's like this is like a way to kind of smooth a lot of that and
Yeah.
just make it like boom, pallets down, boom, lot scanned. We know we instantly know how much ammo we have and what type, right? Because it affects their firing solutions, and then they have like robot arms like throwing these things and like the fucking back of a cat or an A7, right? And I mean, this is like, hey, we're just going to do this faster.
Yeah.
So
And if we go back
cool
to our
stuff.
like AI thought here, the pallet hits the ground, I scan it, I know exactly how many rounds I have. And oh, by the way,
Yeah.
I have the data on like how fast that battery is firing. And now I can project, okay, in 3 days
Yeah.
time, they're gonna need a resupply of this amount of stuff. Also based on like, the projections of how people are moving forward and stuff. It's all interconnected and really cool shit.
Yeah. No, it's pretty cool. But
Yeah.
this is a great example of defense innovation.
Yeah. All right,
Yeah.
y'all. So that wraps up the mission brief. Now we're gonna head into the Civvy SITREP, where we talk about economic news that you need to know. So this is stuff that's going on in the civilian business world that we think is important for you all to at least have a ground eye view on. So I know we have a lot of military folk in Texas, a lot of Texans who are in the military. And if you're not aware, Texas has been super fucking freezing cold this past week.
It's apparent, yeah, and it's gotten warmer today. My realtor
Yeah.
called me and was like, she's like I think it's getting better. I'm like, well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think what's really interesting about this is so what we're looking at right now is an article in the Wall Street Journal, and it's all about why the power grid failed. Okay. And, I think it's really easy to look at it on the surface level and say, oh, well, it was like super cold. Everyone cranked their heat up and it just failed. Right. But somewhere in there within the system of the energy market in Texas, and I mean, everywhere really in general, there's incentives baked in that encourage energy companies to do certain things both to their grid and their power supply and everything. And so this article is kind of looking at like what happened with that incentive structure that allowed this to happen. So Kyle, do you have any thoughts on reading this?
Yeah, well, first off, my company is largely headquartered out of Austin, right?
Uh-huh.
And when Texas, if like this first started, like talking to them, like my coworkers, they sounded like they were on Mars. Like Matt Damon's like stranded, like, oh, we got no water, got no power, and like I feel for him too. That sucks.
Yeah, that
Like
sucks, man.
straight up. I'm not making fun of him. It just
We're making a
yeah. Like what do you
little bit of
do?
fun, just a little bit.
Yeah, no, I mean it is. I mean Texas does have a very try hard attitude, right?
Absolutely,
But
absolutely.
yeah, but it's interesting, right? Because there's two things that happened. One, suddenly everybody on my Instagram became experts in the ERCOT electrical network, and also apparently on renewables versus non-renewable energy
Right.
sources, and how they were designed in Texas, which I found to be really amusing. And I also found it amusing how quickly it got politicized too. I
What?
was like, damn,
Something got
yeah,
quickly politicized? Even the
yeah.
weather? Crazy, man.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, even the weather, right? And it was
Yeah.
just and I posted something, it was like everything I had read, right, from sources I trust, like such as the Wall Street Journal editorial board, which I find the editorial board, not the lunatics they invite to submit articles, to actually be pretty like down the middle and call it
Yeah.
by the facts, right? And they were saying like, like, look, uh it is not just a wind problem. It's also how the grid is designed and the fact that they're relying on natural gas as well. And so you have these turbines, right? They're not these wind turbines that aren't producing as much energy, and the baseline grid of like non-renewable energy like wasn't enough essentially, and specifically with natural gas, like I guess like coal and nuclear. I saw this like graphic, right, and it showed like output over the course of like 3 days or something, and the natural gas was going at like 450%. And the wind like crashed like 97% or something, and like the coal nuclear couldn't keep up. And so I think it's an example of a problem that's more complicated than people are saying, because
Right.
I mean, how sophisticated can you get on like a TV show or Twitter or whatever, right? But it's just like, no, it's like, hey, if you want to use renewable sources, right, you also have to make sure there's some sort of base load that if for some reason those sources don't work, right, because by definition, you can't really control them. You can't control the wind, you can't control the sun, or the clouds, right? So I mean, and that's not me like saying renewable sources are bad, right? I drive fucking Tesla, right? Like I'm all for something that doesn't pollute. Yeah, but it's just interesting. Like, boom, like everybody's like, we got something to say about this. I'm like, all right,
Yeah,
chill.
yeah. I know, like as I was reading this and kind of like looking into it a little bit, I I'm always super interested in the incentives and like how am I as an individual or a company incentivized to do a certain behavior, and then like what's the likelihood that I'm going to respond to that incentive, and like how far am I going to go to pursue that incentive, right? So like what I'm reading in this thing is that the utility companies have an obligation to provide power, but there's not necessarily any incentive or design within the system to necessitate that like they always have to provide power, right? There wasn't like a worst case scenario, um, part of the deal that said like they had to be able to provide power if it gets them 1 degree in Austin, which I mean, granted, the likelihood of that happening and the probability of that happening is super low. I don't know when the last time that happened in Austin, Texas was, but it was probably a hot fucking minute before right now, right? But it happened,
Yeah, I
and
mean, it's crazy how hot it fucking gets because the power
right,
grid gets
right,
put to the max there when it's
yeah,
120 fucking degrees outside.
yeah, and there like wasn't they didn't have to be able to provide power in that worst case scenario when like everyone's cranking their heat up all the way and needing electricity and all the other stuff you need it for. They didn't have to be able to like match the needs of the grid. And I think like that's my takeaway from this is like that kind of tended to be the core problem, coupled with all the things you talked about as well.
Well, speaking of incentives too, this is an interesting paragraph. It says Texas has what is known as an energy-only market. Producers are paid only for the power they generate. If they're paid to be on standby for all weather conditions, that would encourage investments to ensure they are ready to go. Electricity market veterans say stolen valor there with the electricity market veterans.
I
Yeah,
think it
no,
might
I mean, but it also says, yeah, hey, it's totally deregulated. I mean, I don't know, it's totally deregulated. Is
right.
anything really totally deregulated? And so like largely in the southeast, right? They're saying like, hey, it's on the utility companies, right? Like the state's not going to mandate that they keep the fucking power. You
Right.
know, it's on the utility companies to ensure they can provide service. So yeah, it's interesting for sure.
Yeah.
I'm just glad they're getting out of it because it sounded
Yeah.
truly awful.
Yeah. It sounded terrible. And for those of you who are in Texas and had, times without power or heat or anything, we're feeling for you. I know that was not fun for anyone involved. All right. The next thing we want to talk
Yeah.
about. So everyone knows COVID times, lots of businesses have had to pivot, go into new roles, whatever. In particular, food service industry has had to figure out new ways like how do we maintain business and like keep lines of revenue going when we can't pack our restaurants like we want to, right? So everyone kind of quickly adopted like, okay, we got to figure out how to make delivery happen. uh, I know at one point New York City was allowing like delivery of alcohol, which was just awesome, and I hope that continues to stay just because why not. But what we're looking at right here
It'll
is
stay.
like a thing happening where restaurateurs and chefs are looking to basically bypass the traditional restaurant model and like just use the kitchen. And so then you deliver, I go to kylesrestaurant.com or whatever and I order my takeout, but kylesrestaurant.com only exists within a kitchen. And then the food that Kyle makes in his restaurant just gets delivered to me directly from there. And there's no like physical there. I mean, there's like a physical kitchen that people are using, but there's not like a restaurant that I'm going to and sit down and take my order in. It's like all done digitally, and it's really just me interacting with Uber Eats or DoorDash or whatever, and the kitchen where someone is making something. And
Yeah, it. When Uber fired its former CEO, and I can't remember his name right now, I'd have to
I want to
Google
say
it.
Travis
I do
something.
remember him. Yeah, it was Travis Kalanick. There we
Yeah,
go.
that's it.
He sounds like sounded like he was in like a punk band or something.
Oh, totally.
He actually he was, and I don't know if he's done it right, but I remember reading about this, and he said, I want to like invest in ghost kitchens, right? And because he's saying like the idea is that when you think about technology, at least from my perspective, the way to think about it is technology is going to enable us to do more, right? By finding inefficiencies, right, that exist between
Right.
two nodes, right?
Right.
And so a ghost kitchen helps solve that by allowing people are still going to go to the restaurant, right?
Sure.
You know, it just means more people can order your food, right? And restaurants can sell more, and because they can sell more, they can buy more in bulk, and they can bring costs down, or whatever, cogs, cost of goods sold, they can do, and they'll still charge good money for the food, right? It'll just be like I would order fancy food in Chicago all the time from like places when I was traveling for work, right? Like corporate card, and
Swipe that shit.
it's like yeah, and I loved it, right? Because like, I didn't have to go to the fucking restaurant. And I'm like, hey, if
Yeah.
I want a bomb ass steak, or if I want some like sinfully good like food from this French place, right? Like I know it's not going to be like I'm at the restaurant, but I'm still going to order it.
Right.
And this the whole ghost kitchen thing, it'll just be like maybe this is the future. We just don't cook. I mean, Americans already don't cook that much anyway. And this will just be the future, right? It'll become cheaper than it will be to make food.
Yeah.
It'd be beautiful. You know how much time you get back? Though I do like cooking, to be fair.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something definitely enjoyable about cooking. And I think like what's attractive about this model is like, let's say you're an aspiring chef and like you really have like a unique idea for a certain, niche in the food market or whatever. Starting a restaurant is freaking expensive. Like it takes
It's brutal.
and it's super tough. The restaurant business is notoriously difficult, right? But now this lowers the bar to entry and opens it up where if I'm a good chef, okay, now all I need is, me and a couple cooks or whatever, and like we need just some kitchen space. And now we can make a whole brand for ourselves without needing wait staff and like the
Yeah,
physical space and everything.
yeah. It's almost like in Pittsburgh there was this restaurant incubator down in this old factory
Oh, cool.
or warehouse district, right? Which is of course where all the cool places are now.
Right.
Like, but like restaurants would like rotate in and out, for like 6-month time period, right? See if they were gonna like hit it off,
Yeah.
and like maybe this ghost kitchen thing will be like turned to some sort of restaurant incubator where hey, I need to buy some space at this ghost kitchen
Yeah.
and they can make my recipes.
Yeah.
I can like
And
try
then,
you can like everybody has their own shop now.
right. Right. Yeah. And I think like there's an opportunity there too as like another stream of revenue for a larger restaurant that maybe has some excess space or something
Yeah.
in their kitchen. He's like, okay, you know what? We have a couple burners and some prep space that we're not really using as much as we thought we were going to. Guess what? Yeah, if you want to rent this out from us, you can.
Yeah, no, it's cool. And it's just resources being allocated to meet need, right? Like this is capitalism. This is people finding ways to allocate resources in a manner that is most efficient. Though yes, we all know, at least I recognize totally free capitalist society, well, would be great, but probably not as great as we think it would be.
Probably
So
not, but there's lots of great things about it for sure. All
Yeah.
right. So the next thing we're going to talk about, so Goldman Sachs. And before we get into this just for a second, I do want to highlight. So if I'm not mistaken, you did their veterans integration program, correct?
I did, and it
Yeah.
was a great time. It
Yeah.
was a really cool experience. I
So
gone from some fuck all unit at Fort Hood to at the for Goldman Sachs. It was quite the change.
right. So for those of you who don't know, Goldman Sachs has a really cool program specifically just to bring vets into Goldman Sachs. It was actually started by his name is blanking on me right now, but he is
He's a Navy SEAL.
Okay, maybe I think of a different guy then. I thought he was a former, maybe it was like run at the time by a former Marine. His dad was a famous Marine. And then he ended up becoming the
There was a Marine there.
like deputy.
And he was like he was like a
He eventually ended up becoming like the deputy undersecretary for special operations, low intensity conflict. That's the only reason I know him, because like I kind of fell under his purview a little bit.
yeah.
But it's a really great program that's out there that if you're interested in going into.
I don't mean
please,
it's
please.
changed
No.
a lot since
Okay.
it's like when I went through, it was like basically like they replicated an MBA internship,
Gotcha.
but like in the spring, right, instead of the summer.
Right.
And so you were kind of this weird spring intern that people like were like, why are you here?
You're an intern?
I don't know.
Huh?
It was cool. Yeah, well, like I mean, but I mean, Goldman Sachs is used to interns. Like you
Right.
know, it's very off cycle. And then there was also the caveat that you were a veteran, and so they were like, "What the fuck?" Like, but now it's changed, right? Because of COVID, right? And I think also like a year ago or a couple years ago they changed it, so it was like it went from like a full MBA internship to like something much more castrated. So
Yeah.
I
They're
mean, I'm
more
sure there's still value to be getting out of it. It's not like it used to, where you would move to New York City and you were
right.
fucking go to
Right.
Goldman Sachs every day, which
Right.
was, tell me, quite an incredible feeling to be walking in
Yeah.
that Goldman Sachs every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
So the story we're talking about with Goldman Sachs. So Goldman Sachs has kind of like long been one of these like uh one of these banks that's been like kind of catering to the mega rich, right? So if you wanted to get into their private wealth management, like
well,
if you,
the corporate and the mega rich.
right. But like if I wanted to go and give my money to Goldman Sachs and like, hey, I want you all to manage this, it used to be minimum $10 million, right? So like, I mean, I don't know about you, I don't have $10 million like laying under my mattress right now. Um,
Well, to be fair, it is still $10 million if you want like the private
right,
wealth,
right,
right?
right,
And
right,
when you think of Goldman Sachs as a non-retail bank, right? They when I went there, one of the things I quickly learned, right, during my short tenure there was they don't display, like if you walk by the Goldman Sachs building at 200 West Street, they don't display, like you wouldn't know, if you wouldn't know what building it is, you wouldn't know what it is, right? There's no
right,
Goldman Sachs like sign anywhere, and that's how like kind of like non-retail they were.
right,
Like they didn't even want normal people to know where their building was.
right, right. But now they have opened up this new product offering, what they're calling Marcus Invest. Okay. So now what this means is if you have at least $1,000, you can give it over to Goldman Sachs and they will manage it for you. Now, if you all have heard of, there's a couple other companies that are doing something similar. I know um, there's a company called Betterment out there. There's Wealthfront. I know Vanguard has a digital advisor as well. So essentially, what it is like, you create like a basic profile of like, this is how much money I have to invest. Here's my risk profile and everything, and then they like automate it all for you. And that's what Goldman Sachs is offering through Marcus Invest. You give them $1,000, and they're gonna like automate your investing for you. All right. And I think one of the reasons
Yeah, they yeah.
go ahead.
No, go. Sorry, Mark. Yeah, they. I mean, I'm just saying when I was doing my internships there, they were getting ready to launch like the original Marcus,
Right.
which was the either the credit card and loan products, right? And so now Goldman always kind of moves at their own timeline and pace, right? So now they're getting around to like this, pseudo robo advising, um, which will be interesting, right?
Yeah, yeah, and so it's a different take for them because now they're becoming much more approachable to the retail average investor. And if nothing else, I think part of the reason they're getting this is it's a way to like diversify their revenue stream and get some more money in a different way that they're seeing that this approach is very attractive to a lot of people, and it's like a pretty um, given the scope of everything that they have at their hands, like they have the data, they have the wherewithal to be able to like build this out, and they can open it up, and it's not going to significantly degrade the Goldman Sachs brand that everyone that the super rich and the
Yeah,
corporate know and like.
which is why it's called Marcus and not
Right,
Goldman Sachs.
right, right, right.
They'd be like, they're really trying to create, like one is the Ritz Carlton and one is the Spring Hill Suites, right? There's a
Yeah,
reason there's a brand differentiation. Interesting about this, right, is because personal investing has become so popular through apps like Robinhood.
yeah,
Some of the yellowing that goes on. Interestingly enough, Goldman has not done this, right? You'd think Goldman could develop a Robinhood style app, right? But then I don't know. They're probably worried about like if they do it. Like I almost think Goldman now is kind of like Apple. Like they kind of like move in their own kind of pace, right? And only release stuff when they
absolutely.
really want to release it. They don't rush. They don't rush stuff. And that's it's become a very tech focused company. It's really interesting, right? They've moved the whole corporate and investment bank, right? It's still definitely there. It's just they recognize it. Maybe they want to become like the tech wizard kids. They want to be like J.P. Morgan, but more technical. They want to be like the super techy version of JP Morgan. So
Right.
I don't know.
And I think like you bring up the point of Robinhood, right? And I think what they definitely don't want to be is a place like what Marcus is not going to offer you is a place where you can buy and sell individual stocks. And their strategy, as they kind of worded out here, is the best path that's forward for the retail investor is to have a like standard diversified portfolio that like you just put money into every month, and like that will consistently grow for you. The average person, if you're trying to pick stocks left and right, over time, you're probably just not going to do well. Like statistically shown, like it's just not. Yeah. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more in our next one, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but, it's interesting, right? People get like upset about that, and they say, "Hey, why you're keeping me from getting rich, right?" But like you have more to lose than if a company loses $100 million, right?
Right.
Like, like it's just the truth, right? Like you personally, and that's one reason, companies they view the retail trader with a little bit more of a wary eye, because no company wants to be in the news for like ruining somebody's life.
Yeah. And the reality of it is like we all, we love to hear the story about the UPS driver who, picked a couple stocks or whatever and became, worth $20 million when they retired or something. But what you're not hearing is also the same people who did that and then ended up having nothing at the end because they lost it all because they were poor at picking stocks, right? When if they just put it into like a nice kind of diversified portfolio, it would have grown well and like they probably would have done super well in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So the next thing that we're going to talk about here, kind of right in the same vein, is so the title of the article we're looking at is called "Why Your Wild Trading Ideas Feel So Right." The kind of basic premise is that if nothing else, you have to realize that the stock market is a huge human-driven psychological beast. All right. And I think we kind of saw this from, and I'll bring it back up, GameStop, right? Like the underlying value of GameStop, highly debatable, right? GameStop, excuse me, highly debatable. But everyone piled onto it because it was psychologically enticing. You're like, oh man, dude, stocks, Reddit, Wall Street bets, hell yeah, let's just pile onto this whole diamond hands, everything, rocket ship to the moon. I just want to keep putting money into this when the understanding of like what's really going on isn't quite there. And it is such a trap of like emotions and wild rides and everything. And like that's so much of the stock market that people don't want to admit is happening.
Yeah, and this is interesting, right? Because people will follow their gut, and this has to do with like say Bitcoin's gone to 50,000. I just know in my gut it's going to go to 60,000, right? And that gut feeling, which is what this article is talking about, is a compilation of all these different inputs that we get as people, and our body and our minds have a schema in them based off our experiences that is going to then take in those inputs, and without us even kind of thinking about it or assisting it as we kind of like turn it in our head, generate outputs, right? And that can lead to gut feelings that can give you the sense that something is right. And you see this with sport, with athletes, right? Somebody plays in the NFL has like so much, they have so many models in their head of how something's going to go in the field. They can feel what's going to happen before it happens, right? Because their bodies can subconsciously, and like if you ever done like sports psychology, right, there's like the whole like subconscious level of being able to do stuff quicker, which is why athletes are so fast, because they train to that sort of level. But financial markets, they kind of offer feedback in a different way, right? Like how this article puts it, say, hey, it offers a wicked feedback structure. So say you buy a stock at 10, it immediately goes to 11 as a famous investor discloses she bought it, or people on Twitter pumping it up. Bitcoin, but then you're like, oh, then you were right, and then it like falls to like $9, and another noted investor says like they dumped it, and so now you're wrong, right? So that is erratic feedback. That's feedback that isn't helpful to you. Like if you think of yourself as it's like a giant machine learning computer, like you're not getting the kind of like right data to like train, or you're getting it. You're getting data. You're just getting it in a very painful way, right? Like you could lose a lot of money. So when you can get the chance to do this again, or the impact has been so hard that it prevents you from taking risks again when you should take risks, right? And so that's part of this. Like when you think about if you think you're doing well, and why people are bad at the stock market, right? Because they just don't have the experience, or like they get burned so bad, or they succeed that they have like they've developed like some like model in their head that is not keeping them exposed on the risks that they want.
Yeah. And so much of it is just ripe for confirmation bias. So like the example you brought up of I invest $10 and then it goes up to, or invested, the share price is $10 and it goes up to 11. Immediately I get that positive feedback that says, "Oh, yeah, good job, Mark. That was the right pick because it went up." Well, then it goes back, then it goes down to 9 and you're like, "Oh, well, nope, no. It's going to go up because I know I bought it at 10 and then it went up to 11 and I'm just like I'm like waiting for that hit again of it to like go back up." And then
Yeah.
you're looking on Reddit feeds or Twitter feeds or whatever of investors and they're saying like, "Oh, keep buying this, blah 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 blah. This is the right pick." And all you're seeing is just confirmation of like, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, when it's not necessarily a like data driven empirical approach to, is this the right decision for me and my portfolio and what I'm looking at.
Yeah, and I have trouble like I don't, I'm not a big fan of Bitcoin, right? And the reason I'm not is because of the model I have in my head of how I think money, you would value something is from the training I got in my MBA program because I majored in finance and I spent a lot of time focusing on it. And that's what I was exposed to by a program that's very quantitatively driven. And it's like, hey, if the intrinsics aren't there, right, then you're basing it off of, what the market's pricing it at. And that introduces many more variables that are hard to quantify or justify because they are based on emotion or momentum. So,
Yeah. Yeah. All right. And
but we,
don't worry, y'all. We're going to be talking about Bitcoin here in a couple minutes too. But before we get to Bitcoin, we're going to be talking about Tesla. So the article we're looking at is called "How
yeah,
Tesla Made It to the Winner's Circle." All right. So I think most people probably know that Tesla has just skyrocketed in value. They've now entered into the S&P 500. I think it's the fastest company ever to do that. And like, they just kind of come out of nowhere and rocketing in value. All right. So Kyle, I know you're a
yeah.
Tesla owner.
Well, first off, yeah.
Well, rocketing in share
Go
price,
ahead.
I'll say. Yeah. I know you're a Tesla owner. What are your thoughts on what we were reading here?
I thought the article, the title was a little misleading. It
I
says they've
agree.
made it to
Yeah.
the winner's circle. It doesn't mean they're going to stay there, right?
Right.
And the
Right.
reason, right, this goes back to what I was just talking about is Tesla. What Tesla trades at a really high multiple to its earnings. And when you look at different car companies, right, the car companies are going to have multiples applied to them. Say like, hey, here's like their enterprise value and back it up against their EBITDA. And so if you take all these different car companies and you perform that calculation, I mean, I'm not sure what the multiple set is because I'd have to look it up.
Sure.
But generally, like it could be, I don't know, like 10 to 15x. I don't know, maybe like times your EBITDA. And Tesla just doesn't have that, right? Like Tesla like trades it like their earnings, if you're using the multiple, like say all these other car companies traded at 10 and Tesla, you know, is trading, at whatever times its price to earnings are, its earnings would have to be like some exponential multiple more.
Right.
So I think the title is a little misleading, but I mean they are in the S&P 500, and it's interesting to see like because yeah I bought one, but I mean I bought one at like what year, like 10 or something. But so in 10 years, this car company has managed to like vault to like this huge valuation. And it's really fast, right? It's like you
Super
think about it,
fast.
like 10 years ago doesn't exist. Now it's worth more than all these other car companies in the S&P. Um, and it's really interesting. This article says why, right? If you've grown up in the past decade, and have started to like pay more attention to your money, you would know that leaving it in a savings account is a terrible idea because you don't make any money off of it, right?
Right.
So it has pushed all this money into the stock market and to people into searching for alpha return on their investment. And so people say like, hey, like I'm willing to like take a small portion of my allocation and YOLO it into some super risky trade that looks like it's going to go really well. And Tesla's benefited from that, right? Because it's
Hmm.
been a trend over the past, 10 years. Like I was at Disney World the other weekend. I ran into this couple behind us, and this guy had like a road tan Honduras hat on, like, I don't know, maybe he'd been down in the aviation unit there, and his wife. And they're telling me how they were like a Tesla millionaire or something. I was like, that's pretty cool, you
Yeah.
know? And they, he's like, I don't know, YOLO'd like 50 grand or something into it back in the day. Now he's like made a ton of money. Like this opportunities like that just didn't used to exist. and like investors have just become more like optimistic, right? With with tech companies that just have like a really charismatic CEO, or they're just able to consistently deliver cool shit. As an example of that, what Mark and I were talking about beforehand, before we started the show, is I was saying like, hey, I put up on my Instagram today some stories of like this, the Tesla like driving itself or doing the summon feature, right? When it comes back to you. And the way Tesla has structured this is I'm only going to have these features for like another month or so, because like I'm getting to try it for like 3 months, right? Like the full autopilot. And then I'll go back to the basic autopilot, which is still pretty good. It'll like keep the car like driving on the road at a certain speed and like in the lines and everything. And so like Tesla had basically says like at some point we're going to get our autopilot so good that they're going to it'll become so expensive that you'll have to basically buy it as a subscription. And whereas now they're like, well, hey, if you pay us $10,000 now, and they recently raised it from like 7,500 from the research on the internet I did, you can secure your autopilot for your car now. It's just a matter of time before your car becomes fully self-driving. And that's a bold fucking statement. You want to pay $10,000 to like for something that isn't fully mature yet? Like literally, I get on my phone right now and do it. I could buy it. Just put on a credit card. And wouldn't that be a cool podcast moment if I did? But I'm not going to do it because
come on, man.
I haven't convinced myself.
Do it for the podcast.
Yeah. I be like $10,000 on your Apple card.
Don't do it. Right.
Yeah,
I think like,
it also said like they started making money. Yeah, go ahead.
No, so you were talking about the like charismatic CEO and like the cool tech and everything, and it kind of goes back to our conversation earlier about the psychology involved into investing, right? Elon goes on there, makes crazy tweets. He goes and like smokes pot on Joe Rogan and everything, and people are just like love the brand of Tesla, and they just like want to dump money into it without necessarily understanding like the underlying value. And most people are not sophisticated enough to look at like what's my earnings multiple and everything. Like people aren't looking at that kind of stuff. They're just looking at the surface level feedback loop of
well, I mean, the average
someone tweets something and I want to put
like this goes like like, hey, the stock is like shooting through the moon. I'm going to jump on the momentum. I'm not going to go analyze the company's financials, right? Oh, did you see that? I mean, Elon Musk is an expert at creating a spectacle.
Yeah, totally.
Which if there's one thing I've learned from running the social media page is that spectacles, they just get eyeballs more. Yeah, it's just the way it works. It's human nature, right? And it's just crazy that they've just been able to leverage all these different things going on to just shoot to the moon.
Right. Well, speaking of
a lot of Tesla bulls out there.
Speaking of shooting to the moon, the last thing we're going to talk about is Bitcoin. So I just checked the price here mid-show,
Bitcoin,
and Bitcoin is trading at about $56,000 right now. So it just crossed over the 50K mark, I think in the last week or two or something like that. And what we're looking at is the title of the article is Bitcoin, what to know before investing. Okay, so you were kind of just talking about your thoughts on Bitcoin. Let's hear some more about what's good and or bad about Bitcoin as an investment. And let everyone know here we're not registered financial advisors in any way, so don't take our word at face value as the thing.
Please. I have to tell people ask me for investment advice all the time, and I just tell them like invest in index funds. I'm not going to tell you anything that's going to ruin your life. Like people literally send me fucking stocks, and they'll be like, "What's your take?" And I'll be like, "I don't know." I mean, you just can't. I'm not fucking Jim Cramer, man. Like I'm not going to like, mad money you. Bitcoin, like as an investment, I am like hesitant because I find it to just be purely speculative. And the idea, right, is that people think, I think if you really talk to somebody about Bitcoin, what they'll tell you about it is this could replace gold as some sort of like reserve currency, right? Because think about it. Like if you want to go get your hand on a piece of gold right now, you have to pay, whatever the market price is. Can you get your hand on a piece of gold? Gold's not fucking easy to get, right? So by definition, because it's rare, people assign some sort of value to it. I mean, because the dollar is just, we just all believe in it. And so they think like, hey, because Bitcoin only has like 21 million coins, like it could become like gold, right? And so that's where people are holding on to Bitcoin, and trying and like pumping it up, like that's the idea, like it's not, that's why it's speculative, right? There's nothing like fundamental
Yeah.
about Bitcoin other than scarcity. So I don't know. I personally just don't believe it, but
Yeah.
I've been wrong about a lot of stuff before.
Yeah. It's so in full disclosure, I have a little bit of Bitcoin. I came back from a deployment, had some cash, and was like, you know what, I'm gonna put some money in there. The people who say that it's gonna replace fiat currency, I'm like, come on, man, you're crazy. Like that's not gonna happen. All right, grandma is not gonna start.
Yeah. Why does it have?
Grandma's not
Yeah.
going to start going to the grocery store
Like, why does it? Yeah.
and buying with Bitcoin. Like that's not going to happen. All right. And people who tell you that that's going to happen,
why does it have to be
bullshit.
Bitcoin?
Right.
Yeah. Why does it have to be Bitcoin? Like somebody tell me. Like you can make another cryptocurrency.
There is something in that argument. I think like you can easily make a crypto, like an additional cryptocurrency or something. I think the difference is Bitcoin has a significant first mover advantage. Like it has become the crypto that people think about. And now it's become, you can use it on Apple Pay, you can use it on PayPal, you can use it on Square. Major investment firms are putting, 2% of their portfolio of, billions of dollars in crypto and everything. I think it's always important to point out because people are looking at this being like, oh, hedge funds are putting money in Bitcoin. It's like, well, it's a very small,
like
everything else that they're doing. Right?
It's like microscopic, right? If anything, they're like, yeah, we're just going to test the waters here because they see there's some sort of momentum, but or they don't want to seem like they're out of touch.
Right. That's another thing. Yeah. Some of this is the signal of like, hey, we're cool. We have some room for speculation in our portfolio, and like that's how we're going to allocate it here a little bit. I tend to detract from the anything else can replace Bitcoin argument just because Bitcoin has been like branded as like the digital currency that will be used. If anything else, like there's a gazillion other coins out there, but like, no one's going to go Ripple or Litecoin or whatever for anything else, right?
I think it's important to understand why people think that's important, right? Because in the past 10 years, in this era of cheap money, right, since 2008, the governments have printed a lot of money. And people worry about when governments print money because they're worried about inflation. And when inflation happens, it degrades the value of what you have, right?
Right.
If like you have X amount of money and the inflation shoots through the roof, then you fucking don't. And people say, well, hey, Bitcoin could be a hedge against that because then you have something that no government controls and therefore cannot be subject to inflation. But that doesn't mean Bitcoin can't be subject to the rest of the rules of economics. Right. And when you think about, hey, there's like a liquidity freeze, right? Or there's some sort of crash, or maybe somebody manages to accumulate something, right? And they, like that right there is if that happened, people would just, they would switch to another cryptocurrency. Or it would, or say like, hey, we can introduce another cryptocurrency, which is then it's self-inflation, because now you're saying like, hey, now we're going to inject more money into a system that we're already using, which is one reason why there was a Federal Reserve, right? The Federal Reserve exists to, control the monetary supply and policy of the country, and why countries have central banks, right? And so like, I just like, I if there's one thing I try to not be, it's a detractor, because I think the world, who can predict the future? I just say like structurally, I think it's more complicated. But there's something else to consider too. Nobody's fucking doing shit right now. Everybody's just sitting at home or, doing stuff outdoors. And unless you're in Florida, that place is totally open. But what happens when people, like, the pandemic is over, and it will be over. Like I saw a JP Morgan thing that said 40 to 70 days. And then people were like, well, I'm going to go fucking bar and get, spend drinks or, order food or travel or whatever. People are not going to be spending their fucking money in Bitcoin, right? Because people have nothing better to do, than sit around and YOLO fucking, whatever proportion of their savings into a speculative cryptocurrency. I really think it's something to consider. It'll be really interesting to see if people can spend their money on other stuff. But that's my rant over. Sorry.
Hey, maybe we'll come back to this episode a year from now, and someone out there is a Bitcoin millionaire from the money they put in now. I don't know. I hope the best for all of you.
You need unless Bitcoin goes to like $1 million, like you needed to have gotten in like 5 years ago.
Right.
Like when I was in business school and people were like, you can't miss out on this. And then I had the same sort of half-baked arguments back then. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. And like now I'm making the same arguments and it's at 50,000 or 55 or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe I'm the dumb one.
I don't know. Who knows? All right, y'all. So this kind of wraps up the show for the week. Before we close out, Kyle, any last thoughts, words of wisdom for everyone out there?
No, I think everybody's probably done hearing me rant. So
awesome. Well, hey folks, thanks for tuning in. And as a last reminder, if you haven't subscribed to the show, one, please go subscribe. And if you haven't left us a review, we really appreciate everyone who's gone and left a review on the show. And it kind of does a couple of things. One, it lets other vets find out about this and, can help them out through the transition. And also just provides us good feedback on like what you think about the show. So subscribe and leave a review. We appreciate everyone who comes on every week and listens to us. So thanks, stay safe, and we'll see you all next week. Take care.
yep.